Megan called just as I was immersed in my work. I didn't have time to talk, and I wanted to interrupt her without listening, especially when she hesitated for a few seconds before speaking. Just when I was ready to tell her I didn't have time, she started sobbing. Everything else was momentarily forgotten in the face of my daughter's obvious pain. "Megan, what's wrong, honey? Tell me." I felt helpless, listening to the anguish in her sobs. Did someone die? I wondered. Or was she dumped by a boyfriend? What if she was pregnant? Endless possibilities for pain spun through my brain like clothes in a dryer. "Oh, Daddy," Megan whimpered. "We need to talk to you. Is she pregnant?" "Okay, I'm gonna come home right now." I started. "No," my daughter insisted. "We need to meet away from Mom." This was a turnoff. My wife was usually the one my kids socialized with. "Okay," I repeated. "Tell me where and when." We agreed to meet at the lake in the park after work. "We love you, Daddy," she said sadly, hanging up. The rest of the day I was useless at work. I kept thinking about Megan. "We love you, Daddy." Her voice sounded so sad. Why did her words hurt me so much? And was the we her and her sibling? Her and a lover? I couldn't focus on work at all. Megan was 16, Diane was 15, Ian was 13. Joanna and I met when I was on a shore leave in San Diego in 2005. Joanna was working as a topless waitress while attending college at SDSU. I was a lusty sailor who was lucky enough to hook up with a woman who was a goddess too good for the rundown bar she was groped in. To make a long story short, I spent my entire vacation with Joanna, and after taking a short sea cruise, returned to San Diego with the firm intention of making her mine forever. We eloped to Vegas, got married, and were just getting ready for a wonderful marital vacation when my ship was booked on a flight to the Persian Gulf. I moved Joanna back to my small hometown, where my parents had a rental house that they rented to us. I tried to introduce her to some of my friends before rushing back to Dago for duty, but she didn't seem to connect with them. They were too straightforward for Joanna. In San Diego, she was used to a more interesting group. I figured she had gone to college there, so my redneck friends were probably too insular for her. I felt awkward leaving her in a strange place with no friends other than my parents. But already the first letter had reassured me. She had met a woman named Monica, with whom she seemed to instantly bond. Joanna was exactly that kind of person. Just look how quickly we bonded. The letter talked about how much she missed me, but that she was busy with Monica, her boyfriend Bucky, and their friends. She seemed happy, but I still felt guilty about not being able to be there for her. But then, during my second month in the Gulf, I got the happy news. Joanna was pregnant. Apparently, our goodbye had had an effect. Now Joanna would not be alone. I got lucky right after Megan was born and was sent back to the States for training on the updated radar system. Joanna and Megan were able to join me at school from time to time. I loved my daughter from the moment I saw her, and of course I loved my wife, many times before returning to my ship. Deja vu. During my second month in the Gulf, I received the happy news that Joanna was pregnant again. Diana was a stubborn child. She waited until her 42nd week to be born. We feared a possible stillbirth. But Joanna seemed strong and resilient. I was stuck in the Gulf of Mexico. By the time Diane finally emerged, I was back in the States, spending a week at home before returning to San Diego to go through the discharge process. When I returned home, I was able to accompany my newly pregnant wife to her first Lamaze class. Ian burst into our lives, showing up at 38 weeks. Joanna was busy with the kids and spending a lot of time with my now retired parents. I asked my mother what had become of Monica and her friends. "I haven't seen them much the last few months," my mom told me. "You know, having kids makes it hard not to get disconnected from your single friends. I think Joanna's just settling down, that's all. She doesn't really have that many new friends. Everyone she knows now has kids. Joanna, the kids, and I have made an idyllic life in my hometown. I was able to use my naval education to get a position as an engineer at the local television station. It was a well-paid position, and over the next 12 years, I was able to advance to department head. We had a wonderful lifestyle with healthy, active children. What could have gone wrong? What went wrong? I thought as I waited by the lake. I had arrived early and was very nervous. Waiting did not improve my state of mind. Neither did the tight hugs I was given by all three children. They all had tears in their eyes. They all seemed to avoid looking me in the eye. Megan pulled me to a park bench. I sat between my daughters, and my son stood next to us. Diana squeezed one of my hands in hers and rested her head on my shoulder. She was crying. "Daddy," Megan gathered her wits and began, "we love you. You're our daddy always." She couldn't take it anymore and cried again. Oh my God, what was that? I was starting to get short of breath myself. She started again. "Daddy, my class was given an assignment to make a family tree, and I thought I could get more by sending our DNA to 23andMe. She wiped her eyes. "Cousin Elizabeth told me about her family's results, and I thought it would be a big surprise for you and Mom. So I sent in my, Diane's, and Ian's data. I was having trouble breathing. I could only think of one thing it could lead to, and I didn't want to hear my daughter say it. Daddy, we're not your kids." Megan looked at me with the saddest expression on her face I'd ever seen. I shook my head. "Wait a minute. You didn't have my DNA, so what makes you think you're not mine?" I almost laughed in relief. "Whatever the kids think, it must be a mistake. Dad, they show everyone you're related to. They show everyone in Mom's family on her mother's side, but the father's side is full of people we don't know. Most of them are European. It made me go cold. I tried to think of how the kids could have gotten the correct version of Joanna's DNA, but not mine. Is it the same for all three of you? That confused me. How could it be? Yes, and we're all full brother and sisters." Diane squeezed my hand. "You're our daddy. You're our daddy." She buried her face in my chest. Ian looked miserable, like he wanted to cry, but he was trying to be a man. He sniffled and wiped his nose with the back of his hand. We sat in silence for a few minutes. I listened to my girls crying quietly and my son kicking the ground with his shoe. Finally, I spoke. "Give me the 23andMe reports. Could you guys go to a movie or something tonight? Maybe a night out? Let me talk to your mother." I put my arms around the girls and pulled them close to me. Ian shook my hand, trying to be manly despite the tears. They agreed to spend the night at a friend's house. Megan handed me the reports, and they turned to leave when I stopped them. All three of them as one turned and looked at me. "I'm your father, no matter what. No matter what those reports say, there's no one else." I forced a smile out of myself. "You are my children, and I couldn't have wished for better." I kissed them again and hugged them tightly. Left alone, I looked over the reports. There could be no mistake. They were clearly Joanna's children, not mine. I didn't know a single person on my father's side of the family. All my relatives were missing, including my sister and her family. I drove home to find out the truth. Joanna was making dinner, but turned around when I walked in, opened her arms to hug and kiss me as usual. She stopped, spreading her arms wide when she saw my face. What was wrong? I had never spoken to her so coldly. "Who is their father, Joanna?" Her face went pale and her eyes widened in panic. What are you talking about?" "Megan did a 23andMe on all three of them, Joanna." I stepped toward her and growled, "Who is their father?" Joanna staggered to a chair and sat down. "Ian should be yours," she muttered, staring at the floor and shaking her head. "Bullshit. Ian is good enough for both girls. A sibling. Who did you sleep with, bitch? Are you still sleeping with him?" I was losing control. I was clenching my fists, holding my hands to my sides to keep from hitting her. "It's not possible, Jim. It's impossible." Joanna shook her head. She started to get up, but I grabbed her and threw her back into the chair. She flinched and looked at me with fear in her eyes. "Are you going to sit down right now and tell me what happened, or am I going to have to beat it out of you?" Her fear intensified along with my threat. I was in so much pain and so angry I probably would have beaten her. For a moment she stared at me intently, then dropped her head on her hands, defeated. She started so quietly that I almost didn't hear her speak. It had been so long ago. I suddenly found myself in this backwater town, all alone. I loved you, but you were gone. Your friends were so boring. But then I met Monica, and she took me to the local diners. She had drugs, just like the club in San Diego. She sniffed her nose and looked at me. I was 19 years old. I was used to partying. I loved you, but you left me here. Monica and Bucky were fun. We partied and got high and drunk. You weren't even 2 weeks old when I woke up in bed with Bucky. He had other friends there, too. I don't know who the father was, but it was probably one of them. She looked at me with desperation. I prayed that you were the father. I really did. You could have been one. We had sex a lot before you left. She lowered her eyes to the floor, admitting defeat. Fuck, I was stunned. You hadn't been faithful to me for even 2 weeks? And you've had sex with so many guys that you don't know who could be the baby's father? I stood up and pounded the table with both fists. Are you fucking kidding me, you fucking whore? Joanna slumped into the back of her chair. I wasn't going to sleep with them. We were having fun, and then I woke up. They used me. Oh, yes, you really fought back. Apparently you fought back so well that you fought back at least 2 more times over the next 3 years. I wanted to pound on the table until I broke my arms. I wanted to grab a chair and hit the refrigerator with it. I wanted to hurt Joanna. I wanted to hurt myself. I didn't. My wife got up and went to the sink for a glass of water, probably to get away from me. No, I resisted. But Monica had the tape. She threatened to show your parents if I didn't keep hanging out with her. She said threesomes are more fun with 2 girls. Gangbangs? How many guys have you slept with? I didn't want to know. Why did I ask? Bucky had 1 or 2 parties every week, each time with 5 or 6 guys. Sometimes there were more and Monica would join us, but usually it was just me. I tried to control it. I used spermicide and Plan B, but when you were home, I must have screwed up. She looked at me again. But I hoped they were yours. I convinced myself that they were. Joanna walked back to the table and sat down. For a moment, she stared at me, absorbed in her thoughts. I should have resisted more. I should have hated it. She shook her head dazedly. But you know I love sex. You were all I needed. That's why I married you. I didn't need anyone else. She looked at me sadly. But you weren't here. And maybe Monica blackmailing me was the excuse I needed, so I figured if I had to have sex, I might as well enjoy it. She saw the look on my face. I know you're hurting, but I want to be honest. Yes, I was drugged, raped and blackmailed, but then I got over it. She started sobbing again. You weren't here, and I needed to be. I'd go to clubs with Monica, and she'd encourage me to go to the parking lot with her friends. We'd fuck in the back seat of Monica's car, or Bucky's van, or a guy's car if Monica was in hers. Then there were the gangbangs. They usually happened on Saturdays. Whenever you came home, I refused to go to the meetings that Monica and Bucky had. I didn't go to the club with Monica. You were all I needed. She looked at me with fear and tears in her eyes. I made sure you never even met Monica and Bucky. You didn't even notice. You were always either with the girls or in bed with me. Speaking of girls, where were Megan and Diane while you were having fun? I made fun of that slut who was the mother of my kids. Your mom liked to keep an eye on them. She knew I was lonely here. I've never lived in a small town like you. I'm used to the parties and excitement in San Diego. I was used to sailors groping me and lusting after me. She lowered her head and sobbed. Damn it, I was used to being had. I was shocked. Now my wife was looking at me like it was my fault. I wanted to hit her back. So are you still prostituting yourself with Monica? Or do you have a new pimp? Joanna grinned crookedly. Good choice of words. I used to think at parties that I was sleeping around for fun. Then one night, just before you came back from the Bay Area for good, Monica got sick and I went to the club alone since I'd already given the kids to your mom. She shook her head and wrinkled her nose. I wasn't forced to go to the club, but by then I was going clubbing and getting laid on my own. Anyway, one of the gangbang regulars was there and I went with him to his car. After he was done, I was getting dressed when he handed me some cash. I asked what it was for, and he said that since neither Monica nor Bucky was there, he thought he should give it to me. They're usually the ones who take the money. That's when I realized I wasn't just the whore I thought I was. I was a prostitute. Tears streamed down my face again. I thought I had low self-esteem, but that night I discovered I was even lower than I thought. She stared into my eyes for a few moments before continuing. That's when I told Monica and Bucky to go fuck themselves. I threatened to go to the police, even if it meant getting arrested for prostitution. You had to come home within a month. I just wanted to spend my life with you. Her face contorted. I only wanted you. A month? That doesn't explain Ian. I can't explain it with Ian. Bucky insisted on another fuck, but I used spermicide and made him wear a condom. I was sure Ian was yours. I sat for a few minutes. We looked at each other in silence. I thought about the years we'd spent together, wondering if it was just us, or if there were others in bed with us, so to speak. Then I thought, 2 weeks? 2 weeks alone, and she was already sleeping with Bucky. That's when I realized I'd never trust her. Pack up your stuff, say goodbye to the kids, and get the hell out of my life. I could probably forgive you if you told me when you first woke up with Bucky, but how can I trust someone who admits they enjoyed prostitution for years, even when it wasn't necessary? You couldn't wait to spread your legs. But since that last time with Bucky, it's just been you. I've always been faithful. She saw the look in my eyes. We'll never get past this. She sobbed, got up, and left the room to pack her things. I walked out of the house. I found out later that she had packed most of her clothes and left. I don't know where she was staying, but she came home the next day when I was at work. She wanted to try to explain all this to the kids. They were not kind to her. Megan, in particular, was extremely mean. My neighbor later told me that Megan kicked her mother out of the house, calling her a whore. Megan yelled at her to go prostitute somewhere else, while the neighbors went out to see what all the commotion was about, and Diane and Ian watched from the porch. We never saw Joanna again. She went into the bank and took most of our savings. She left me investment accounts, so I ended up with more than half of our fortune, not counting the house. I didn't know where to file her divorce papers, so I just waited the 2 years it took to file a missing persons report. Epilogue. My mother loved Joanna like her own daughter. She loved my children even more. I was afraid to tell her about Joanna's prostitution and the children's unknown, though probably Bucky's origins. I sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and broke the bad news. Her face literally contorted as she sobbed at the horror of it all. And the children, they're not yours? Does the DNA show that? Yes, apparently they are related to a bunch of Swedes. Most of their relatives are in Sweden. Mom looked up sharply. How's that? They matched your DNA? I explained that we had never had my DNA tested, but it wasn't necessary. My children were supposed to match my sister and her offspring. My mother shook her head incredulously. I never thought it mattered. That's why we never told you. I really didn't think it mattered. You're my son. I didn't understand what Mom was saying. I was her son? Wasn't I my father's son? My children should be like my sisters. Mom, what are you talking about? She looked at me almost pityingly. Son, you were adopted. We had a Swedish au pair for your sister who got pregnant. We wanted a son, so we adopted you. Your birth mother returned to Sweden after you were born. You were our son, so we never told you about it. Well, I went and took a DNA test, and it matched all 3 of my children. They were mine. Like I said, we never saw Joanna again. I don't know what happened to her, and I was never able to tell her that I was the father of her children. But did it matter? If it hadn't happened that the children's DNA didn't match that of my relatives, I would never have known about my wife's promiscuous past and probably would have remained happily married. But now, would I be able to forget about her past, even though the children were mine? No. It all comes down to the fact that 2 weeks is the limit of her marital fidelity, and the fact that even though she was initially coerced, she admitted to accepting the life that Monica and Bucky provided for her. As I tell my kids now, who would have thought that marrying a topless waitress from a dive bar in San Diego would turn out this way?